Hello, welcome back to Marathon Man, where I go through Doctor Who from the very beginning, and you join me as we recap Season 5. When it once looked like it would only ever have one, this season now has 6 stories available on home release, which is, I was going to say wonderful, but it's magic. It's like, especially when one of those stories came back in its entirety. And now that story is The Enemy of the World, which in my opinion is easily the jewel in this season's crown, with its sort of like shake-up of the formula, its deviation from the template of the season, which is much needed in, I think, probably, while I did enjoy it a lot more, this is still the most formulaic of Doctor Who seasons, maybe I would say. So it's got that, and it's also got like a dual role for its increasingly charismatic leading man. This has in the past been the hardest going season for me, with its average score the lowest of all 5. Now, this time, it's the most I've ever enjoyed Season 5, but to kind of prove that, if I crunch the numbers, yeah, okay, it still lags slightly behind Seasons 1 to 3, but this time, it's actually beaten Season 4. This is big news for me, given how grueling I have found the repetition of the formula in the past. And I still think that adherence to the formula brings with it some drawbacks beyond the obvious, and it may just be a culmination of the Doctor kind of restyling himself from just a traveller to the defeater of evil. Towards the end of the previous season, the Doctor had achieved the upper hand over his enemies and instantly launched into peace talks with them. None of that here. This is resolutely the Doctor versus the monsters.
They dare to tamper with the forces of creation?
Yes, they dare. And we have got to dare to stop them.
Evil is what I meant. There are some corners of the universe which have bred the most terrible things. Things which act against everything that we believe in. They must be fought.
And this season takes that to its limit. And presenting us with bases under siege every week does get samey. And presenting us with monsters every week kind of has the same effect. And it almost, if I may be so bold, at points threatens to have an adverse effect on the Doctor's character. But these reservations are minimal this time around, and I can't deny that there have been some very enjoyable stories here. Included, in my opinion, the first couple of absolute classics for the Troughton years. But I used to be a little confused with how much inconsistency could lie in such consistently formulaic material. That used to add to the frustration that I felt. This time, though, it helped bring the changes, and I began to see that Season 5 might not have been as formulaic as I once thought, once I got past the obvious trappings on the surface. And for all the ennui brought about by toing and froing along corridors of yet another base under yet another siege by whatever the monster was that week, and for all of the eye-rolling at a stubborn controller uninterested in what the Doctor had to say, The Enemy of the World and the Web of Fear both still feel incredibly fresh to me, and coming where they do in Season 5, they really did give the marathon a kick up the arse. Alongside which, I had Troughton's Doctor. And it's a very odd thing, this, because if I compare Hartnell's era with Troughton's, Pats is left a little wanting. Like, there's no competition in my mind. The Hartnell years are roundly trouncing the Troughton ones so far, to the point where I almost feel sorry for them. Hartnell Who is just like a so much more enriching experience for me, to the point where I still miss it even now. I still miss Hartnell Doctor Who even at this point at the end of Season 5. But if I compare Hartnell's Doctor with Troughton's, then I think it's Pat that may have the edge. In even the drossest dross, Troughton's Doctor is never anything less than watchable. Unless, of course, you can't actually watch the episode in question. In which case, he still commands attention and does wonderful things with his voice. It's almost as if Troughton had the foreknowledge that a lot of his era would only ever be discernible from still images and soundtrack. So rich is his performance that it kind of manages to transcend an episode not existing. So yes, there's some very big plus points in Season 5, if maybe not as much as in preceding Who. But to kind of prove how big some of these plus points are, There is now not just one, but 2 new entries in my top 10 at this point. Number 10, The Web of Fear. Transplanting the Yeti from an arguably more germane background in the Himalaya to the contemporary London Underground makes them work 10 times better. Throw in the first appearance of Nicholas Courtney's wonderful Alistair Gordon Lethbridge Stewart, and you have a story which feels so much bigger than it actually is, with perhaps the greatest opening episode of any story so far. Number 9, The Romans. Still in the top 10 at the moment, this season 2 story manages to be many wildly different things, and it still feels like one piece. Easily containing some of the best First Doctor material ever given to Hartnell, it also cements Vicky as an absolute asset to the show. Number 8, The Crusade. Richard the Lionheart, his sister Joanna and Saladin all feel like key characters in a sumptuous BBC historical drama chronicling the Crusades. And the Doctor, Vicky, Ian and Barbara have somehow just blundered into it. It is a superb production. Number 7, The Enemy of the World. Once upon a time, I had The Web of Fear above this one by quite some margin, but now that it's back to us in full, I see that The Enemy of the World is Season 5's greatest asset. It's pacey, it's got flashes of inspiration, and it's populated with fantastic characters, not least the odious Bennick, the fabulous Farrier, and the outstanding Griffin the Chef. Number 6, The Savages. The top 10 is gradually having all of its historicals phased out. With The Web of Fear, The Enemy of the World and this one, there seems to be getting a bit more variety in this list. Now, even though my newfound appreciation for Season 5 is a shock, The Savages might be the greatest surprise for me on the marathon so far still. Its placing here is something I would never have predicted when I started this particular watch through. Number 5, The Mythmakers. This has sat at the top of this list before, but its current placing at number 5 doesn't mean its fall from that top spot is ignominious. Just an illustration of how much I love Doctor Who, or more accurately, how much of Doctor Who I love. Vicky's farewell story is a really strong 4 episodes of this mad old show. Number 4, Marco Polo. Early on, Doctor Who showed its strengths for visiting history, and this story is a fantastic journey in and of itself, with the travellers really just wanting to get their key so they could leave again. How that manages to be this good over 7 episodes is, like Doctor Who also has strength in, a little bit magic. Number 3, The Aztecs. Marco Polo, Season 1 historical stablemate, trumps it slightly for me by being that bit more streamlined and with a more prominent comic streak. Juxtaposed with the usual horrors of history, this comes out feeling like such a well-balanced story that there's very little between the stories at this point on the list. Number 2, The Time Meddler. Season 2's final story is a game changer, and not just in terms of introducing the first of the Doctor's race beyond himself and Susan, it also blends the science fiction and the history, which Doctor Who had kept largely separate up to this point, and it blends it so well that it ends up pretty much establishing the template for whenever the show visited Earth's history from this point on. Number 1, The Massacre. Controversial perhaps, but this story's atmosphere and its audacity just pulsate out of it. While there are strange narrative decisions, I cannot help but get swept up in it. Stephen being stranded and Peter Purvis being so excellent at conveying that really make this feel like Doctor Who at perhaps its most brave. Now, for those who follow this marathon, they'll already know, but I've pointed out several times through the course of it that I think one of my biggest changes in opinion, probably almost a complete U-turn in fact, is that I used to dislike Victoria Waterfield and also dislike Deborah Watling's performance of her. Now though, having watched season 5 on I think it was the previous marathon where I started to come around, but this time I realised just how wrong I was, and that's such a nice feeling. Nice feeling, being wrong sometimes, isn't it? Season 4 might have had, relatively fewer shifts in the TARDIS team than Doctor Who used to have. And Season 5 has fewer still. It's obviously, I know that Zoe joined in The Wheel in Space, but it's a bit too early to appraise her in the pantheon of companions at this point. So we really only had Jamie and Victoria throughout Season 5. And they very quickly became like one of my favourite TARDIS teams. So, where does Victoria, at this point, who used to sit very, very close to the bottom in my companions list, where does she sit now in my top 10 companions? Number 10, Susan Foreman. With Victoria obviously getting into the top 10, this has bumped out Dodo, and it means that Susan, the OG companion, the Doctor's own granddaughter, now sits at number 10. And I don't think I'll ever stop feeling bad about this, but the role of the companion naturally became refined over time, and when it comes to companions travelling on their own with the Doctor, the roles of Susan, Ian and Barbara almost get consolidated into single characters. Susan, unfortunately, and despite Carol Ann Ford's valiant efforts, has the least to give. Number 9, Sarah Kingdom. Fewer than 12 episodes, only 2 which exist, and she still beats out the Doctor's granddaughter. And I feel a bit naughty about that, but I honestly do believe that Sarah Kingdom makes such an impression in her one story that she absolutely deserves this place on the top 10 companions. Number 8, Polly Wright. Annika Wills does such strong work that I feel like Polly on paper would actually be below Susan, but Annika is so accomplished that she breathes more life into Polly than is on the page. Now, I want it noted that I love Annika Wills and I have a soft spot for Polly. Placing her at number 8 at this point isn't throwing shade, I promise you. Number 7, Ian Chesterton? What? Each time I do one of these, Ian drops a spot, and I always do a double take when I come to write these lists, because good old Ian, down to number 7, unthinkable. But also, it's a fact. Number 6, Ben Jackson. I think Ben suffered greatly as the show began to favour Jamie, but Michael Craze never ever took his foot off the gas, and it's because of that Ben remains relatively high here. He kind of breaks the mould for male companions, more so than I think is spoken about. Number 5, Victoria Waterfield. What can I say except apologise to her? I was convinced she was an irritant, a character that had nothing really of note to her at all. Except that I was wrong. She doesn't start well at the end of season 4, but quickly earns her stripes at the beginning of this season. She takes out Cybermats, is clever enough to use people's perceptions of her against them, and when she pretends to be poisoned in The Abominable Snowman, for instance, and defiantly leading Krishong off the beaten track, show a character far stronger than I had remembered her being. Perhaps this perception had been coloured by her sudden uncontrollable terror and fury from the deep, a story which may have given her an absolutely wonderful departure, but did also seem to take her back a step or two in bravery and pluckiness. Number 4, Stephen Taylor. I think Peter Purvis is one of 1960s Doctor Who's MVPs. Not just on screen, with Stephen being a constant throughout season 3, but behind the scenes as well, because apparently he was able to wrangle Hartnell to some degree. And Stephen feels like the glue holding Doctor Who together throughout its 3rd season, and I still don't think the character gets as much credit as he deserves. Number 3, Vicky Pallister. Oh, look at that, a shake-up. Because yes, season 5 has seen a new entry in Victoria, but it's also seen a slight shift in how I see Jamie too. Now this means that Vicky has been bumped slightly, but don't go thinking that means I've gone off her, far from it. Vicky is still one of Doctor Who's all-time greatest companions, and Maureen O'Brien's return in Tales of the TARDIS and her multiple roles in Big Finish show that she is still utterly incredible. Number 2, Jamie McCrimmon. It wasn't long before Hines established an absolutely golden chemistry with Troughton, which really soared once the show deposited Ben and Polly from whence it picked them up, and it cemented the Doctor and Jamie as a formidable team. They built on this in season 5 and had, with Jamie as the more experienced companion this time, more scope to add in lovely business like accidentally holding hands, the Doctor getting the hell out of there when Jamie announces he has a plan, and larking about standing on each other's hands. They are really believable as friends, and season 5 came with a TARDIS crew that seemed to be about fun as much as anything else. Jamie remained as brave and resourceful as he always had, but Hines also threw in some much needed brevity and cheekiness, more so than Ben, Stephen or Ian had. Getting all hot and bothered about futuristic female clothing is not something I would have seen any of those do, to be honest. Number 1, Barbara writes, I am nothing if not predictable. It used to be with relief that I said goodbye to season 5, but no more. I think this time I now realise its charm, and I do see why so many people love it. Just as I came around to season 3, season 5 can now count me among its fans. It also used to be a relief that I said goodbye to Victoria, but again, no more. I now realise just how good she is as a character and just how good Deborah Watling was at performing her. And even though I will miss her a lot, it is with great joy that I welcome Zoe along for the ride. Now, The Wheel in Space is a very troubled story, but its saving grace is that it introduces this lovely new companion to us. And she's about to go off and travel with the Doctor and Jamie into season 6, which carries with it only 7 missing episodes. And these days, 2 of those have been animated, meaning I've only got 5 reconstructions left. I find it hard to believe that I've reached Troughton's final season already. Because I know while there's been interruption in these video uploads recently, the marathon hasn't stopped. So when I got to this point, it makes me go, oh, blimey, get ready to say goodbye to Troughton. But it is a really lovely, long season of 60s Doctor Who, so I don't have to say goodbye to him just yet. And also, when it comes to the end of 1960s Doctor Who, it's bittersweet, because while I love 1960s Doctor Who, I love Hartnell and I love Troughton, it is sort of a little bit encouraging that missing episodes will no longer be part of the equation. There are mixed feelings about where I am on the marathon, to say the least. I think that's what I'm trying to say. As ever, thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this overview of Doctor Who's Base Under Siege Monster of the Week 5th season, then you know how YouTube works. Please do give it a like and share. It really helps spread the word and brings more people to the marathon. And what are your thoughts on season 5? Is it samey, boring, or is it Doctor Who at its searing best? Are you a convert like me, or have you always been on the season 5 train? And what does your companion list or top 10 look like compared to mine? Let me know in the comments below, and I'll see you back here soon for the final season of the 1960s. So if you don't want to miss that, hit the subscribe button, clang the cloister bell, and I'll see you on Dulcis.